Oliver Matthews looked out his small window as rain tapped gently against the glass. The tiny cottage he called home sat at the edge of Meadowbrook village, where the houses grew smaller and the gardens more wild. Inside, the walls needed paint, and the floors creaked, but it was clean and tidy, a reflection of the man himself. His dark fingers trembled slightly as he held the fancy cream envelope. The gold lettering caught the light. "William Porter and Emma Clark request the pleasure of your company." Oliver could hardly believe it. The Porters were the wealthiest family in Meadowbrook, living in the big stone house on the hill that overlooked the village like a watchful parent. "Why me?" he whispered to himself, setting the invitation on his worn kitchen table. 3 months ago, during the worst ice storm in years, Oliver had been walking home from his shift at the coffee shop when he spotted an elderly woman slipping on the frozen pavement. He'd rushed forward just in time, catching her before she fell. The woman, with her silver hair and kind eyes, had thanked him warmly. Only later did he learn she was Mrs. Porter, William's mother. "Just being decent," Oliver murmured, remembering how the woman had gripped his arm tightly as he walked her safely home. Now Oliver's life was harder than ever. The factory where he'd worked for 8 years had closed suddenly, leaving him and 30 others without jobs. The coffee shop only needed him 3 days a week. Money was tight. Some nights he went to bed hungry. Oliver glanced at his reflection in the small mirror above the sink. His dark skin contrasted with the crisp white shirt he wore for work. People in Meadowbrook were mostly kind, but he always felt different, always felt their eyes following him. Being one of the few black residents in the village meant standing out whether he wanted to or not. What made people truly notice Oliver, though, was his voice. When he sang, everything changed. The richness and power that flowed from this quiet man surprised everyone who heard him. On Friday nights at the Green Man pub, the locals would beg him to sing just one song. When he did, the noisy room would fall silent, pints of beer suspended halfway to lips, all eyes on Oliver as his voice filled every corner. "I can't go to this wedding," Oliver said to himself, looking down at his worn hands. "I don't belong there." Yet something pulled at him. Maybe it was the memory of Mrs. Porter's grateful smile, or maybe it was just the chance to step into a different world for one day. What would I even give them, he wondered. Wedding gifts should be special, and Oliver had nothing special to give, except his voice. That evening, after his shift, Oliver borrowed recording equipment from his neighbor, Tom. For hours, he worked on getting the perfect take of Forever Faithful, a love song he'd written years ago but never shared widely. His voice soared on the chorus, rich and warm like honey in sunlight. When he finally played it back, even Oliver had to admit, it was beautiful. He carefully placed the CD in a case and wrapped it in the only nice paper he had, left over from his sister's birthday last year. It wasn't fancy, but it was heartfelt. The next challenge was what to wear. Oliver opened his small wardrobe and pushed hangers aside until he found it, the navy blue suit he'd worn to his father's funeral 3 years ago. It was a bit loose. Now, hard times had trimmed his frame. The trousers needed pressing and the jacket had a small tear in the lining, but no one would see that. Oliver counted the money in his savings tin, just enough for a bus ticket and to have the suit cleaned. At the village dry cleaners, he would have to walk the 3 miles to work every day next week to make up for the expense, but it would be worth it. 2 days before the wedding, Oliver collected his freshly cleaned suit. It looked almost new. He spent that evening polishing his only dress shoes until he could see his reflection in them. The worn leather couldn't be fixed, but at least they shined. On the morning of the wedding, Oliver woke early. He showered with the special soap he saved for important days, carefully shaved, and put on his best white shirt. As he knotted his tie, dark blue with tiny silver dots, his hands shook slightly. "You don't have to go," he told his reflection. But deep down, Oliver felt that this day might be important somehow. He couldn't explain why, but as he tucked the wrapped CD into his jacket pocket, he felt a strange sense of hope flutter in his chest. The bus to the Porter estate was nearly empty. Oliver sat alone, watching familiar streets give way to the wealthier part of the county. His heart beat faster as the bus climbed the hill toward the grand houses with their perfect gardens and long driveways. As he stepped off the bus at the Porter Estate gates, Oliver took a deep breath. "Just be yourself," he whispered, straightening his tie one last time. "Just be yourself." With his head held high, he walked toward the sound of music and laughter, carrying his simple gift and his extraordinary voice. Oliver stood at the entrance of the Porter mansion, his heart beating fast in his chest. The house was bigger than any building he had ever been inside. Large windows let in streams of golden light that bounced off crystal glasses and silver trays. Men in black suits moved around with trays of tiny foods and tall glasses of bubbling drinks. Women in colorful dresses laughed and talked in small groups. Oliver took a deep breath and stepped inside. His clean but worn shoes made no sound on the thick carpet. He felt eyes turning to look at him. Some people stared for a moment too long before looking away. Others whispered behind their hands. Oliver's dark skin stood out among the sea of pale faces, and his simple suit seemed dull next to their shiny clothes. "Just find a quiet corner," he told himself. "You don't need to talk to anyone." A waiter passed by with glasses of champagne. Oliver took one with a quiet "thank you" and sipped it slowly. The bubbles tickled his nose. He had never tasted champagne before. "Oliver, you came." The voice was warm and friendly. Oliver turned to see a beautiful young woman in a white dress, walking toward him. Her smile was genuine, her eyes kind. This must be Emma, the bride. "Thank you for inviting me, Miss Emma," Oliver said, giving a small bow. "Your wedding is lovely." Emma reached out and touched his arm gently. "William told me all about how you helped his mother during that terrible ice storm. She speaks so highly of you. I'm so glad you could join us today." Oliver relaxed a little at her kindness. "It was nothing, really. Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone would," Emma said, her eyes serious for a moment. "Anyway, please enjoy yourself. There's plenty of food and drink, and the dancing will start after we open the gifts." Oliver nodded and smiled. Emma was quickly pulled away by other guests wanting to congratulate her. He found a quiet spot near one of the large windows where he could watch the party without being in the way. For the next hour, Oliver observed the celebration. The food was delicious. Tiny sandwiches with cucumber and cream cheese, small pastries, filled with meat and sweet cakes that melted in his mouth. He limited himself to one glass of champagne, not wanting to get lightheaded. A bell rang, and a man in a black suit announced that it was time for the gift opening. Guests gathered in the main room where William and Emma sat in decorated chairs. A mountain of beautifully wrapped packages surrounded them. One by one, they opened gifts. There were expensive vases, silver picture frames, crystal glasses, and envelopes that Oliver guessed contained large amounts of money. Each gift received happy thanks from Emma and approving nods from William. Oliver's stomach tightened when the small package wrapped in simple blue paper was handed to the couple. Emma opened it carefully and pulled out the CD in its clear case. "Oh, how nice," she said, reading the handwritten label. William took it from her hands. His face changed as he looked at the simple gift. The smile dropped from his lips and his eyebrows pulled together. "A CD," William said, his voice loud enough for people nearby to hear. "That's it." Emma touched his arm. "William, it's a song. Oliver recorded it specially for us." William placed the CD on the table with much less care than he had shown the other gifts. "How creative," he said, but his tone made it clear he didn't mean it as a compliment. Oliver felt heat rise in his face. His simple gift looked so small and worthless compared to the expensive presents around it. Still, he stood tall. The song had come from his heart. After the gifts were opened, servers brought more champagne and turned up the music. People began to dance and laugh more loudly as the evening went on. Oliver checked his watch, thinking it might be time to leave. He had done what politeness required. He had come, brought a gift, and thanked the hosts. Just as he was about to slip away, a loud voice cut through the music and chatter. "Where is it? Where's my watch?" It was William, red-faced and angry, standing in the middle of the room. Guests moved back, creating space around the upset groom. He was looking at his wrist, where an expensive watch had been earlier. "I just had it," William said, looking around the floor. "I took it off to wash my hands and put it on the sink. Now it's gone." Emma rushed to her husband's side. "Are you sure you didn't leave it in the bathroom, dear?" I'm not stupid, William snapped. Someone took it. His eyes scanned the room, moving from face to face until they landed on Oliver. Something in William's expression hardened. Without warning, he began walking directly toward Oliver, pushing past guests. You, William said, pointing a finger at Oliver's chest. You were near that bathroom earlier. Oliver's mouth went dry. Sir, Empty your pockets, William demanded, his voice cutting like a knife through the now silent room. Do it now. Oliver couldn't believe what was happening. Mr. Porter, I didn't take anything. Empty them. William's face was inches from Oliver's now. I know your type. You saw something valuable and couldn't help yourself. The room was completely quiet. Every eye was on Oliver. Some looked embarrassed, others curious. A few even seemed to agree with William. Oliver felt shame wash over him, not for stealing, which he hadn't done, but for being in a place where he wasn't truly welcome. With slow, dignified movements, Oliver began to empty his pockets. All eyes were on Oliver as he stood in the middle of the Porter wedding reception. The beautiful room with its crystal lights and fancy decorations seemed to spin around him. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out the few items from his pockets. An old brown wallet held together with tape, a ring of 3 keys, and a clean white handkerchief with his initials, OM, stitched in the corner by his mother years. Fargo, see for yourself, Oliver said quietly, holding his empty pockets open. No watch. William Porter's face turned an even deeper shade of red. His expensive suit couldn't hide the ugly anger that twisted his features. He stepped closer to Oliver, looking down at the small pile of belongings on a nearby table. Maybe you already hid it somewhere, William hissed, or passed it to a friend. A few gasps came from the crowd of guests. Many looked away, embarrassed by the scene unfolding before them. Others watched with wide eyes, drinks forgotten in their hands. Emma, beautiful in her white wedding dress, pushed through the circle of onlookers. Her face showed both anger and shame. William, that's enough, she said, grabbing her husband's arm. You have no right to treat our guest this way. William shook her hand off. I have every right. My watch cost more than he probably makes in a year. Oliver felt a cold feeling settle in his stomach. He had faced this kind of judgment before, but never so publicly, never with so many eyes watching. Still, he stood tall, his back straight. Mr. Porter, Oliver said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, I came to your wedding because I was invited. I brought a gift from my heart because I couldn't afford more, but I would never steal from you or anyone else. The room fell silent again. Even the soft music playing in the background seemed to fade away. The only sound was the ticking of the large grandfather clock in the corner. I think I should leave now, Oliver said, reaching for his belongings. Before William could reply, the heavy wooden doors at the entrance of the hall swung open. A tall man in an impeccably tailored dark blue suit walked in. Everyone turned to look. Many gasps and whispers followed. Sorry I'm late, the newcomer called out, his deep voice filling the room. Traffic was terrible. The man was impossible to miss. Well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a commanding presence, he moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone used to attention. His dark skin gleamed in the light, and his smile revealed perfect white teeth. A gold watch, far more expensive than William's missing one, glinted on his wrist. It was James Thompson, known throughout Britain as Big SHAQ, the music producer who had discovered some of the country's biggest stars. His record label, Gold Crown Records, had produced 10 #1 hits in the past year alone. People moved out of his way as he approached the bride and groom, but he stopped when he noticed the tense scene before him. His smile faded as he looked from William's angry face to Oliver's dignified but clearly uncomfortable stance. What's happening here? James asked, his eyebrows drawing together in concern. William's demeanor changed instantly. His anger gave way to a nervous smile as he recognized the famous producer. Mr. Thompson, what an honor to have you at our wedding, William said, extending his hand. Nothing important, just a small misunderstanding with this gentleman. He was just leaving. James ignored William's outstretched hand. His eyes had fixed on Oliver, studying him with growing interest. Wait a minute, James said, stepping closer to Oliver. I know you. Oliver looked up in surprise. Me, sir? I don't think we've met. James smiled broadly, placing a large hand on Oliver's shoulder. "You're Oliver Matthews, aren't you?" James asked. "From the Green Man pub in Meadowbrook Village?" Oliver nodded, confused. "Yes, but how—" "I heard you sing last month," James explained, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "I was passing through, stopped for a quick dinner. You got up and sang River Deep by the end, and I couldn't believe my ears." The wedding guests began to whisper among themselves, looking at Oliver with new interest. "I've been in the music business for 20 years, James continued, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "I've worked with the biggest names in the industry, and I can tell you all right now." He paused, looking around at the crowd. "This man has the most extraordinary voice I've heard in decades." William's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "In fact," James went on, "I've been looking for you for weeks. I asked around the village, but nobody knew your full name or where you lived. All they could tell me was that you sometimes sang at the pub." Oliver could hardly believe what he was hearing. The famous producer had heard him sing, had been looking for him. "Mr. Thompson," Oliver began, but James cut him off with a friendly wave. "Please call me James, or SHAQ if you prefer, everyone does." James turned to face William and Emma, his expression growing serious. "Now, would someone mind telling me what exactly was happening when I walked in? Because it looked to me like this gentleman was being accused of something." The room grew uncomfortable again. William shifted his weight from one foot to another, suddenly looking much smaller than before. "My watch," William finally said, his voice losing its earlier confidence. "It's gone missing, I thought." "You thought Oliver took it," James finished for him, his tone cool. "Based on what evidence exactly?" William had no answer. Emma stepped forward, her face flushed with shame. "I'm so sorry, Oliver," she said sincerely. "This is unforgivable." Just then, a young server hurried into the room, something small and shiny in his hand. "Mr. Porter," the server called out, "is this your watch, sir? I found it on the floor of the men's room near the sink." William's watch, the cause of all the commotion, gleamed in the server's outstretched palm. The room filled with awkward murmurs and uncomfortable glances. William's face turned from red to white in an instant. He took the watch without a word of thanks to the server and avoided everyone's eyes. "Well," James said, breaking the heavy silence. "Now that that's settled, I think Oliver and I have some business to discuss." The wedding guests stood frozen like statues. No one spoke, no one moved. All eyes moved back and forth between Oliver, William, and the famous music producer. James "Big SHAQ" Thompson had his arm around Oliver's shoulders now like they were old friends. "A recording contract," Oliver finally managed to say. His voice came out as a whisper. "For me?" James nodded, his wide smile showing perfect white teeth. "That night at the Green Man pub, I was just passing through town, needed a quick meal, before heading to London. Then I heard you sing." Oliver remembered that night. It had been a regular Friday. The pub owner had asked him to sing a few songs, as he often did. Oliver had never noticed any important-looking strangers in the crowd. "Your voice," James continued, shaking his head in wonder. "It stopped me in my tracks. Raw talent like yours comes along maybe once in a decade. I left my business card with the bartender, but he said you'd already gone home." Oliver's mind raced. A business card? The bartender had never mentioned it. But then Tom had been working. That night. The same Tom who had always said Oliver was wasting his time with singing. "I spent weeks asking about you in the village," James said. "All anyone could tell me was your first name, and that you worked somewhere in town. I was beginning to think I'd never find you." The other guests had begun to whisper among themselves, looking at Oliver with new eyes. No longer was he the outsider who didn't belong. Now he was someone special, someone important enough for Big SHAQ himself to search for. William Porter stood nearby, his face the color of old paper. The expensive watch that had caused so much trouble was clutched tightly in his hand, forgotten. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Emma moved forward, her wedding dress rustling softly. Tears shone in her eyes as she reached for Oliver's hand. "Oliver," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm so deeply sorry for what just happened. It was unforgivable." She turned to look at her husband. "William needs to apologize to you. Right now." William seemed to shrink under his wife's stern gaze. The proud man who had moments ago been making terrible accusations now looked small and ashamed. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on his shiny shoes. "Mr. Matthews," he began, his voice barely audible, I was wrong, very wrong. My behavior was racist," Emma supplied firmly. "My husband's behavior was racist, and there's no excuse for it." William flinched at the word, but nodded slowly. "Yes, it was, and I am truly sorry." The room fell into uncomfortable silence again. Everyone waited to see how Oliver would respond to this apology. Would he yell? Storm out? Demand William be punished somehow? Oliver took a deep breath. He looked at William, really looked at him, and saw something he recognized: fear. Behind all the money and the big house and the expensive clothes was a man afraid of things he didn't understand, people who were different from him. "We all make mistakes, Mr. Porter," Oliver said quietly. "What matters is what we learn from them." William's head snapped up, surprise clear on his face. He had expected anger, not forgiveness. "I've faced judgment all my life," Oliver continued. The room was so quiet now that even his soft voice carried to every corner. "People see my skin and make decisions about who I am before I speak a single word. It would be easy to become bitter, to start expecting the worst from everyone. But I choose to see the good in people." Oliver looked around the room, meeting the eyes of various guests. Some looked away, ashamed. Others nodded slightly, moved by his words. "I believe we can all be better tomorrow than we are today," Oliver finished. "That includes me, and it includes you, Mr. Porter." James squeezed Oliver's shoulder, clearly impressed by his dignity. Emma wiped tears from her cheeks. Even some of the guests were dabbing at their eyes. Just then, a young woman in a server's uniform hurried into the room, holding something in her hands. "Excuse me," she said nervously, looking around at all the serious faces. "I found this watch, stuck between the cushions on the sofa in the gift room. Does it belong to someone here?" In her palm sat a second watch, identical to the one William was holding. For a moment everyone stared in confusion. Then William's face turned bright red as understanding dawned. I have two of the same model," he admitted, his voice strained. "One was a gift from my father. The other I bought myself as a backup. I must have been wearing one and left the other in the gift room earlier." This revelation only made William's false accusation look worse. He had jumped to blame Oliver when he hadn't even been sure which watch was missing, or if one was truly missing at all. A few guests exchanged glances. Some shook their heads. William's humiliation was complete. James cleared his throat, breaking the awkward silence. "Well, now that's sorted, I believe Oliver and I have important matters to discuss." He turned to Oliver with excitement in his eyes. "That CD you brought as a gift, is that your voice on it?" Oliver nodded. "Yes, sir. A song I wrote myself." "Perfect," James exclaimed. "Just the sample I need to show my team. Oliver, if you're willing, I'd like to offer you a 6-month development deal with Gold Crown Records. We'll provide studio time, vocal coaching, songwriting sessions, everything you need to produce a professional demo. If things go well, that could lead to a full recording contract." Oliver's head spun. Just an hour ago, he'd been humiliated, accused of being a thief. Now the most famous music producer in Britain was offering him the chance of a lifetime. I don't know what to say," Oliver stammered. James laughed. "Say yes, man, this is what you've been waiting for." Emma stepped forward, her earlier distress replaced by genuine happiness. "Please say yes, Oliver, you deserve this chance." Even William nodded encouragingly, eager to make amends in any way possible. Oliver looked around at the fancy room, at the people in their expensive clothes, at the life he'd never imagined being part of. Then he thought of his small cottage, of walking 3 miles to work each day, of singing in the pub on Friday nights for nothing but the joy of it. His whole life was about to change. And it had all started with an act of kindness on an icy day, helping an elderly woman across the road. "Yes," Oliver said finally, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Yes, I would be honored." The bright spring sun shone down on Meadowbrook Village as people from all walks of life gathered outside the new building on High Street. The old abandoned factory that had once employed half the town had been transformed. Fresh paint in cheerful colors covered the brick walls. New windows sparkled in the sunlight. A large sign above the entrance read, "Meadowbrook Community Arts Center." Inside, Oliver Matthews adjusted his tie as he prepared to address the crowd. Through the window, he could see familiar faces from the village mixed with reporters and photographers from London. Even a television crew had come to cover the opening. "Nervous?" asked James Thompson, standing nearby in his trademark stylish suit. Oliver smiled. "A little. It's strange being back here as well as who I am now." Who he was now was nearly unbelievable, even to Oliver himself. His debut album, Truth in Melody, had spent 6 weeks at #1. His first single had been played on radio stations across Europe. Just yesterday, he'd been recognized 3 times while walking through London. "You've worked hard for this," James reminded him. "Enjoy it." The past year had been a whirlwind. Studio sessions, voice lessons, photo shoots, interviews. Oliver had thrown himself into every aspect of his new career with determination and gratitude. The shy coffee shop worker had grown into a confident performer, though he'd kept his gentle nature and kind heart. "It's almost time," said Emma Porter, entering the room with a clipboard in hand. "The mayor's ready to introduce you." Emma had taken charge of organizing today's event, putting her skills as a former event planner to good use. Her husband, William, trailed behind her, carrying boxes of programs. The sight of William still surprised Oliver sometimes. Gone was the arrogant, prejudiced man from the wedding. This William wore simple clothes, spoke kindly to everyone, and seemed genuinely changed. After the wedding incident, William had fallen into a deep shame. His family name, once respected in town, had become associated with his terrible behavior. Several business partners had distanced themselves from him. William had reached out to Oliver 2 months later, asking to meet. Over coffee in a quiet corner of the Green Man pub, William had offered another apology, this one more sincere than the first. He'd been doing a lot of thinking, he'd said, about his assumptions and biases. He'd begun reading books about racism and privilege. He wanted to be better. Oliver, true to his nature, had given William that second chance. When Oliver shared his idea for turning the old factory into a community arts centre, William had immediately offered to help with funding and connections. When Oliver suggested that William, an accomplished pianist, might teach classes, the wealthy man had hesitated, but ultimately agreed. Now, a year later, William spent 3 evenings a week teaching piano to children who could never afford private lessons. Children of all backgrounds, including many who looked nothing like him, and he was learning as much from them as they were from him. "Ready?" Emma asked, touching Oliver's arm gently. Oliver nodded and followed her through the hallway toward the main stage area. The building's transformation was even more dramatic inside. What had once been a dark, dusty factory floor was now a bright performance hall with rows of seats. A beautiful grand piano, donated by the Porters, stood on the stage. The room fell silent as Oliver walked onto the stage. Then slowly people began to applaud. The applause grew louder until it filled the room completely. Oliver saw familiar faces: Tom from the pub, his neighbors, even his old boss from the coffee shop, all smiling proudly. The mayor stepped forward to introduce Oliver, talking about our hometown star and putting Meadowbrook on the map. Oliver listened politely, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the journey that had brought him here, from struggling to pay his rent to having his face on billboards in London. Finally, it was Oliver's turn to speak. He stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his rich voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "This centre doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us, to Meadowbrook, to anyone who has ever felt that music was inside them but had no way to let it out." Oliver explained how the centre would work. Classes in singing, piano, guitar, and drums would be offered. No child would be turned away because their parents couldn't pay. Adults could join evening classes. There would be performances every month where students could show what they had learned. "Music saved my life," Oliver said simply. "It gave me hope when I had very little. It gave me a voice when I felt invisible, and now it's given me the chance to come back home and create something meaningful here." He introduced the teachers who would work at the centre, professional musicians from London and local people with talent to share. William stood among them, looking both proud and humble. Music doesn't see color or class, Oliver told the crowd, his voice growing stronger with emotion. It doesn't care where you live or what your parents do. It only sees humanity, and that's how we should see each other. The crowd erupted in applause again. In the front row, Emma wiped tears from her eyes as she squeezed her husband's hand. William's own eyes were damp as he looked up at the man he had once judged so harshly. After the speeches, Oliver performed 3 songs from his album. His powerful voice filled every corner of the room, bringing some people to tears and others to their feet. For the final song, he invited a group of local children, the center's first students, to join him on stage. They had been practicing for weeks, and their young voices blended beautifully with Oliver's deeper tones. Later, as the crowd mingled and enjoyed refreshments, Oliver found himself standing between William and James, the 2 men who had changed his life in such different ways. "I never imagined any of this," Oliver admitted, looking around at what they had created together. "Sometimes life takes the strangest turns," William said quietly. "Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our best, if we're willing to learn and grow." James nodded in agreement. "And sometimes a chance meeting can change everything." He raised his glass in a toast, to second chances and to music. "To music," Oliver and William echoed, raising their own glasses. Outside, the spring sun began to set over Meadowbrook. Inside the arts center, new beginnings were everywhere. A young girl discovered she could hit a perfect high note. An elderly man found joy in playing drums for the first time. And in one corner, William Porter patiently showed a small boy from the poorest part of town how to place his fingers on piano keys. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a painful moment of truth and lead to places we never imagined possible.